Here is the recording of pages 102 to 107. Worshipping many gods. Like the Sumerians, the Egyptians owed their harvests to a flooding river and the bounty of nature. Also like the Sumerians, the Egyptians worshipped many nature gods. In fact, more than 1,500 gods and goddesses. There was Re, the god of the blazing sun that fills the Egyptian sky nearly every day of the year, pictured with a falcon head crowned by a solar orb. Re was the most important of all deities. His light and heat ensured good harvests. He was believed to be the father of the Egyptian ruler. Osiris was the powerful ruler of the dead, and his sister, Isis, was a mother goddess. Egyptians prayed to Isis for the healing of their children. Both gods were greatly loved and said to help humans in many ways. Horus was the son of Osiris and Isis. This falcon-headed god was at first god of the sky, pictured with the sun as one eye and the moon as another. He became the patron deity for the king. The king even claimed to be the living Horus. Nut was worshipped as sky goddess. She was often shown with wings outstretched, protecting the vault of the heavens. Thoth was the god of knowledge and wisdom, shown with the long curved beak of an ibis. Thog dug for knowledge the way birds use their bills to dig for food. The Egyptians worshipped these gods and many more. They prayed to them for good fortune and protection, and explained the mysteries of nature by their actions. And here's Horus and Isis. When Pharaoh speaks. Archaeologists have found the remains of Nile River villages dating back more than 5,000 years. Over time, the villages became part of two long kingdoms stretching along the river. Egyptians living in the Nile Delta were part of the Lower Kingdom, so called because the Nile flows south to north, and their villages lay downstream. Villages upstream or south of the delta were part of the Upper Kingdom, or the land closer to the source of the Nile. So here's Lower Egypt, here's Upper Egypt. The mountains are here, so the river flows from the mountains north into the Mediterranean Sea. Tradition has it that by 3100 BC, the ruler of the Upper Kingdom, a king named Narmer, united the two kingdoms and founded the city of Memphis as his capital. To show his power in uniting the kingdom, he fashioned the double crown of Egypt. It was made of a white crown once worn by the king of the Upper Kingdom, and a red crown symbolic of the Lower Kingdom. There's that double crown. And then here you can see is where Memphis is. Narmer was the first in a centuries-long line of powerful kings who each ruled Egypt as the head of government, general of the army, chief of the priests, and even as a god. The Egyptians came to believe that each of their kings was the god Horus, come to rule on earth. They revered their god king so much that they thought it was disrespectful to speak directly about him. So in time, instead of mentioning the ruler himself, they spoke of the palace as having done this or that. The word pharaoh meant palace or great house, and people began to call their king Pharaoh by the 16th century BC. When the pharaoh sat on his throne, he sometimes held a symbolic shepherd's crook and a flail to show the care and power he held over his people. The pharaoh owned a lot of the land in Egypt and could do whatever he pleased with it. He often had several wives at once, and it was not unusual for his chief wife to be a sister or half sister, perhaps to keep power in the family. When a pharaoh died, Egyptians thought he became one with Osiris, god of the dead. Then kingship usually passed to the eldest son of his chief wife. The pharaohs of Egypt were powerful rulers, among the most powerful of the ancient world. Most were determined to leave their mark. They did so with great pyramids, imposing temples, and stupendous statues. And let's take a look at the Great Sphinx. Okay, so the Great Sphinx is a huge stone statue with the head of a man and body of a lion right here. It measures 240 feet long, 66 feet high, and has stood in the desert for 4,500 years. It has the face of Khafre, one of the pharaohs who built the pyramids of Giza. Why does the mysterious Sphinx have the body of a lion? Surely in part to remind onlookers of the pharaoh's great strength and power. The lion, the most powerful predator, was a symbol of the king. The Egyptians built sphinxes to stand guard over temples and tombs, including the magnificent pyramids. Okay, building for the next life. For centuries, people have marveled at Egypt's Great Pyramids, the oldest and largest stone structures in the world. A king named Zazer built the first pyramid at Saqqara around 2650 BC, about 500 years after Narmer lived. It was a tourist attraction in the ancient world, but the most famous pyramids stand not far from the modern city of Cairo, at a place called Giza. They were built by a pharaoh named Khufu, his son Khafre, and another pharaoh named Menkaure. Preserved by the desert climate for 4,500 years, these pyramids are one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. It's still hard to believe that ancient people constructed these grand monuments without modern machinery, iron tools, explosives, or even workhorses. The Egyptians built the largest pyramid, the Great Pyramid at Giza, with more than 2 million stone blocks, weighing an average of 2.5 tons each. Its giant base covers 13 acres, and it towers 450 feet into the air. Why did the Egyptians build these giant monuments? To answer that question, we need to understand their religious beliefs. The Egyptians believed that death was not the end of everything, but the beginning of eternal life. That is, the beginning if you had the right help getting to the next world. They built pyramids as tombs for kings, queens, and other royalty, and as homes for the next life. Inside a pharaoh's pyramid, secret passageways led to a burial chamber where the ruler's body lay hidden and protected for eternal life. The pyramid was more than just a tomb. It was a place that guarded the dead, helped the soul on its journey to the next world, and made sure it lived well forever. In was a home, it was a home for eternity. The Egyptians believed that people would use their bodies in the afterlife, so they went through an elaborate ritual to prepare the body as a mummy before placing it in a tomb. A mummy is a body that has been dried and treated to protect it from decay. After a body was mummified, it was wrapped in layer after layer of linen strips. Lucky charms called amulets were tucked in its folds. Then the mummy was placed in a coffin, and the coffin was placed in a stone sarcophagus in the pyramid. Of course, the tombs of common folk weren't so grand. Most common burials were in simple pits in the desert. Mummies of the very poor were simply wrapped in coarse cloth, placed in a pit, and covered with sand. When it came to afterlife, Egyptians believed you could take it with you. They filled their tombs with food, clothes, furniture, games, and other things to make life in the next. Okay, and then just here's some more pictures. And then this would be the coffin, and then this coffin would be placed in a larger stone sarcophagus. So they would take things to the next world more comfortable. In the case of a pharaoh or wealthy Egyptian, the burial chamber was also filled with gold, jewels, spices, and other treasures. That's why the burial chambers were hidden in secret places inside the pyramids to hide the treasure from thieves. Of course, it would be hard to squeeze everything you'd need for all eternity into a burial chamber. So rich Egyptians filled their tombs with paintings and sometimes with small models showing scenes from everyday life, such as people making food. The tombs also held statues of servants for the next world. The Egyptians believed that if the priests said the right prayers, these pictures and statues would come to life and forever supply the dead person with all his or her needs. We have a good idea of what the Egyptians expected in the next world. A dead person would journey across a river to the kingdom of Osiris, ruler of the dead. There were many obstacles on the way, but the Egyptians had all kinds of prayers, hymns, and spells to guide them. This information was sometimes carved on tomb walls. By 1550 BC, it was written down and placed in tombs. Known as the Book of the Dead, it gave a route to follow, chants for protection, and answers to questions the dead might be asked. Finally, the dead person reached the judgment hall and was greeted by Horus, the son of Osiris. Anubis, the jackal-headed guardian of the dead, weighed the dead person's heart against the feather of truth. If a heart was heavy with sin and outweighed the feather, a horrible fate lay ahead. A light heart, however, meant that the owner had lived with virtue. He could then pass on to a happy, eternal life. And then let's take a look at this. How did they build the Great Pyramid? The ancient Egyptians built the Great Pyramid of Giza without benefit of modern machines or even iron tools. How did they manage it? They started by using wooden hammers, copper chisels, stone mauls, and saws to cut huge limestone blocks from quarries. Next, the Egyptians had to haul the blocks to the building site. Sometimes they brought them by boat on the Nile River, and then gangs of men dragged them by sled across the desert. Workers dug canals so boats could bring the stone as close as possible to the pyramid site. There, stonemasons smoothed the sides and squared the corners of the mammoth blocks before other gangs pushed them into place. After they got the bottom layer of stone set, they built long ramps of earth and brick, and sled crews dragged more stones up the ramps to make the next layer. As they finished each layer, they built the ramps higher and higher so they could keep building up. After they fitted all the layers in place, the Egyptians sometimes covered the pyramids with white stones so that from a distance the sides gleamed in the desert sun. Most of these covering stones are gone now, so the sides look like giant steps. Scholars aren't sure how long it took to build the Great Pyramids, but it was probably about 20 to 30 years. It surely took tens of thousands of men. The laborers were probably poor farmers who worked on the giant tombs for 3 or 4 months a year while the Nile floods covered their fields. Why build the pyramids so big? Pharaoh and his architects knew that if they wanted a monument to stand out in the vast emptiness of the Sahara, it had to be big. That's the end of the reading of pages 102 to 107.